Before the first child dies, before Earth understands the enemy, remember this: humanity is not attacked by bombs, it is attacked by law. And one father, Elias Vale, is about to discover that the galaxy has already sentenced his daughter before she ever had a chance to live.
The first child died 7 minutes after the stars went silent. Her name was Mara Vale, and the medicine that could have saved her was already in orbit, sealed inside a relief capsule above the Pacific. Commander Elias Vale watched its tracking icon freeze on the hospital wall while alarms screamed around his daughter's bed. One moment, the capsule was descending through Earth's upper atmosphere. Next, every guidance system on the planet turned red, and a voice older than any human language spoken through every speaker in the room. Quarantine enforcement has begun. All unauthorized biological transfer to Sol 3 is prohibited. The doctors did not understand. Neither did the nurses, the soldiers, or the parents behind the glass. Elias understood only one thing: the capsule had stopped. His daughter's oxygen numbers were falling. And somewhere beyond the clouds, something powerful enough to override Earth's entire orbital network had decided that a 9-year-old girl was not permitted to live. Across the planet, the same verdict unfolded without fire, explosions, or invading ships. Food haulers above Lagos locked themselves out of descent. Colonial transports returning from Mars were turned away by invisible command seals. Hospital satellites carrying organ cultures drifted uselessly in orbit while surgeons stood beneath them with dying patients. Earth was not being bombed. It was being denied. Then every screen on Earth, from military bunkers to street market displays, filled with the symbol of 12 white suns arranged around a black circle. No face appeared. No ambassador greeted them. No war fleet declared conquest. Only a court seal, cold and perfect, followed by a sentence translated into every human language at once. By authority of the Concord of 12 Suns, species 7714, self-identified as humanity, is hereby classified as a civilizational instability risk. Full mercy quarantine is enacted until extinction probability reaches acceptable containment. For 3 seconds, Earth was silent. Then 8 billion people began asking the same question in different languages. What extinction probability? In the Geneva Defense Chamber, generals shouted as satellite feeds collapsed one by one. In Nairobi, a mother punched through a clinic window trying to reach a medicine drone that would never land. In the lunar shipyards, workers watched automated gates seal every outbound vessel with legal codes no human system had written. And in St. Meridian Children's Hospital, Elias Vale held his daughter's hand while the machines beside her counted down the seconds the universe had left her. Mara's eyes opened once. She did not ask why the medicine had stopped. She did not ask who had done this. She only looked at her father as if he still had the power to fix the world. Elias had commanded rescue fleets through solar storms, famine evacuations, and colonial disasters where stations tore apart in vacuum. He had pulled strangers from burning habitats with his own hands. But when his daughter's grip weakened, something inside him did not break. It sharpened. The official Concord notice continued scrolling across the wall. Buried beneath the legal language, beneath clauses about galactic safety and preventive containment, one line flickered in small gray text. Initial judgment filed, 47 years prior to authorized first contact. Elias looked up slowly. 47 years. They had sentenced humanity before humanity even knew they existed. By dawn, Earth had learned the most terrifying thing about the Concord of 12 Suns. They did not need to fire a single weapon to begin killing a world. Their quarantine was not a wall of ships. It was a law that machines obeyed. Every docking clamp in orbit, every automated navigation beacon, every interplanetary trade relay, every civilian traffic corridor that had been quietly upgraded over the past decade with universal safety protocols, now answered to a power humanity had never voted for, never met, and never been allowed to question. The Concord had entered Earth's systems not as invaders, but as software, buried inside the very network humanity had accepted as the price of joining the wider stars. In the first 12 hours, the damage looked survivable. A few delayed shipments. A few stranded vessels. A few hospitals are running on emergency reserves. The governments of Earth told their citizens to remain calm, that negotiations were underway, that the quarantine was temporary. But Elias Vale had watched temporary become permanent in the stillness of his daughter's fingers. He knew better than anyone that a polite death was still death. At the United Nations Continuity Hall beneath the Alps, the first official message to the Concord was written with careful restraint. Earth requested clarification, appeal rights, humanitarian exemptions, and immediate medical corridors for civilian relief. The message used no threats. It acknowledged no guilt. It begged without using the word beg. The reply came back in less than 9 seconds. Appeal denied. Species 7714 lacks recognized standing under Concord foundational law. Humanitarian exemptions unavailable to instability-class civilizations. Containment remains merciful. Merciful. The word spread across Earth like poison. In Delhi, crowds gathered under dead shipping towers and watched food prices triple before sunset. In Sao Paulo, police abandoned checkpoints to help carry patients from hospitals whose supply chains had snapped overnight. On Mars, the children of Utopia Colony lined up for ration cards while their parents stared at the sky, knowing Earth could no longer send them insulin, antibiotics, replacement filters, or grain protein. On the orbital elevators above Quito and Singapore, thousands of passengers slept on metal floors because the systems refused to move them either up or down. The Concord did not appear on the horizon. That made them worse. There was no army to resist, no flagship to target, no capital ship burning in the sky to focus human anger. Only denials. Only seals. Only automated verdicts delivered in calm voices while people died in corridors. 3 days after Mara's death, Elias was summoned to Geneva. He arrived in civilian clothes because his uniform suddenly felt dishonest. The world had not been defeated in battle, and no chain of command had prepared them for an enemy that killed through compliance forms. The chamber was crowded with presidents, ministers, admirals, medical directors, colonial governors, and economists whose faces looked older than they had on the screens 12 hours earlier. Everyone had data. No one had answers. A projection of Earth hung over the central table, surrounded by red arcs where routes had been severed. Commander Lien Okoro from Orbital Logistics spoke first. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands shook against the glass. Within 10 days, we will lose the outer colonies. Within 3 weeks, Earth's high-density medical networks collapse. Within 2 months, agricultural distribution fails in 87 megacities. This quarantine is not designed to pressure us. It is designed to make survival mathematically impossible. No one argued. An old diplomat from the Pacific Coalition tried anyway. He insisted that every civilization had procedures, that even ancient powers must value stability, that a formal delegation might persuade the Concord to reconsider. Elias listened until the man displayed the second response Earth had received. Direct diplomatic contact denied. Instability-class civilizations may not negotiate containment terms. Observation will continue until risk naturally expires. Risk naturally expires. This time, the chamber did not erupt. The words were too clean, too cold, too final. The Concord had not threatened to destroy humanity. They had simply defined humanity as a danger and then written a law where human extinction counted as a safety outcome. Elias stared at the projection until the red arcs blurred. He thought of Mara's room, of the capsule frozen above the Pacific, of doctors forced to watch salvation hover out of reach. Then he noticed something buried in the distribution map. The quarantine was perfect around human routes, but not around Concord observer relays. Tiny invisible corridors still existed. Not for food. Not for medicine. Not for refugees. For surveillance. The Concord had sealed Earth inside a coffin, then left peepholes so it could watch the body stop moving. Can we access those relays? Elias asked. The chamber turned toward him. Okoro hesitated. Not legally. A bitter laugh escaped someone near the back. Elias did not smile. I did not ask if we had permission. That was the first moment the room changed. Not into hope. Hope was too soft for what had begun. It changed into attention. The kind soldiers gave when they heard a weapon being assembled in the dark. An hour later, Elias stood inside the archive vault beneath Geneva, surrounded by linguists, codebreakers, military analysts, historians, and legal scholars pulled from every major human institution. They were not a war council. Not yet. They were something stranger and more dangerous. They were the first humans to ask whether the Concord's law could bleed. Dr. Amara Saeed, Earth's leading xenolegal historian, placed a trembling hand over the oldest recovered Concord file. It had been found in a dead probe near Jupiter decades before anyone knew what it meant. Most of it had been unreadable then. Now, with the court sentence as a key, the translation engines began unlocking line after line. Elias watched the first recovered case appear on the wall. Species 4112. Contained. Then another. Species 5098. Contained. Then hundreds more. Worlds humanity had never heard of. Civilizations reduced to numbers. Quarantines labeled merciful. Appeals denied before contact. Histories sealed behind black legal marks. The room grew colder with every file. Dr. Saeed whispered, "We are not their first judgment." Elias leaned closer as one final fragment decrypted at the bottom of the archive. It was not a Concord verdict. It was a warning, written by someone who had died long before Earth built its first starship. Do not fight their fleets. Fight their definitions. The warning changed the shape of the room. For the first time since the quarantine began, no one was looking at the red maps of dying routes or the casualty projections climbing across the emergency feeds. Every human in the archive vault stared at the sentence left by a dead civilization, and the silence around it felt heavier than panic. Do not fight their fleets. Fight their definitions. Elias read it 3 times before he understood why his pulse had slowed. It was not a plea. It was not a curse. It was instruction. Somewhere in the dark history of the Concord, another species had reached the same wall humanity now faced. They had discovered that the true weapon was not the blockade, not the relays, not even the machines enforcing the quarantine. The weapon was language, classification, legal identity, the right to decide what living people were allowed to mean. Dr. Amara Saeed ordered every recovered file reopened. The vault became a storm of translation engines and desperate hands. Historians searched corrupted archives. Linguists rebuilt dead syntax from fragments. Military analysts stopped asking where Concord ships were and started asking what terms appeared before every extinction. By midnight, a pattern emerged so clean it felt engineered by cruelty. The Concord never declared war. It is classified. Species 4112 had been marked as expansion unstable after developing self-replicating ships. Their trade access was revoked. Their colonies starved within 7 years. Species 5098 had been labeled empathy deficient after refusing to submit their children to Concord education protocols. Their medical imports were suspended until birth rates collapsed. Species 6201 had been judged cognitively hazardous because their mathematics challenged Concord navigation doctrine. Their universities were isolated, their scholars detained, their language banned from interstellar transmission. Each case carried the same phrase. Containment remains merciful. Elias stood beneath the projections while the room slowly realized the scale of what they had uncovered. The Concord had not preserved galactic peace for 10,000 years. It had edited the galaxy. Any species too strange, too independent, too fast-growing, too unpredictable, or too difficult to control was not conquered in battle. It was defined as extinction. The horror did not explode inside Elias. It settled. Quietly. Permanently. They don't see this as murder, Commander Okoro said, her voice low. Dr. Saeed shook her head. No. Murder requires recognizing the victim as legally alive. That sentence struck harder than any casualty report. Earth was not losing because it was weaker. Earth was dying because the Concord's law did not recognize humanity as a people with rights. Humans were a risk category, a containment subject, a future problem being solved before it became inconvenient. Then the first reversal arrived. A junior analyst named Matteo Elin found an inconsistency in the species 6201 file. It was tiny, buried beneath centuries of redaction, but it made the legal scholars stop breathing. Species 6201 had filed an appeal after containment began. The appeal had been denied because they lacked recognized standing, exactly like Earth. But before the denial, Concord's own legal AI had been forced to process one question. Who determines instability when the judging body benefits from the classification? The file ended there. Everything after it had been erased. Dr. Saeed stepped closer to the projection. That question should have triggered a constitutional audit. Did it? Elias asked. No, she said. Someone stopped it. The room changed again. Fear became suspicion. Suspicion became direction. If the Concord's law was automatic, then someone had been interfering with it. If appeals were impossible, then why had one been dangerous enough to erase? And if a dead species had left humanity a warning, then perhaps the Concord was not invincible. Perhaps it was afraid of its own rules. Outside the vault, the world continued collapsing. The second week of quarantine began with blackouts in the orbital food grid. The Mars colonies announced protein rationing for children under 12. A medical station above Luna lost 31 patients after its transplant cultures expired in sealed containers. The Concord issued no apology. Instead, it released a public stability update stating that human emotional distress was an expected symptom of containment adjustment. That phrase became the first thing Earth truly hated together. Not a flag. Not a face. A sentence. Elias asked for every Concord broadcast to be stored, translated, indexed, and compared against the dead species archives. He no longer slept in his quarters. He slept in a chair beneath the projection of Mara's case file, 3 hours at a time, waking each time the vault alarms identified another legal phrase linked to an extinction event. By the 17th day, humanity had built its first weapon. It was not a missile. It was not a virus. It was a dictionary. Dr. Saeed called it the definition map. Every Concord judgment depended on layered legal terms: instability, mercy, containment, recognition, authorized life, jurisdictional safety. To the public, they sounded abstract. To the Concord's machines, they were command triggers. If humanity could prove the Concord had misused even one foundational definition, the legal AI might be forced to review every action built on it. But there was a problem. The Concord had designed its laws so instability class species could not submit evidence, file appeals, or challenge classification. Humanity could see the cage. It could understand the lock. It still had no legal hand with which to turn the key. Then Mateo found the missing piece inside a children's lesson from a former Concord member world. All recognized civilizations were required to preserve pre-contact observation records for audit. Not because of mercy, because the Concord feared false classifications. The system could sentence a species before contact, but it had to prove the judgment was based on accurate observation. Elias felt the room tighten around him. Earth's verdict had been filed 47 years before first contact. That meant somewhere, inside the Concord's observer relays, there had to be decades of surveillance data. Every misread war, every misunderstood ritual, every act of human cooperation ignored because it did not fit the verdict. The Concord had judged humanity from the shadows, but its own law required that judgment to leave a trail. Commander Okoro looked at Elias. Those relays are still open. For surveillance, he said. Not for us. Elias turned toward the orbital map, where the tiny invisible corridors still pierced the quarantine like needles through a coffin lid. For the first time since Mara's death, he saw not a wall but a flaw. The Concord had left windows so it could watch humanity die. Now humanity would use those same windows to look back.
So far, Earth has been trapped by the Concord of 12 suns. Mara Vale has died because her medicine was denied, and Elias Vale has uncovered the truth. Humanity was judged 47 years before first contact, but now the same observer relays built to watch Earth die may become the opening humanity needs to expose the Concord's crime.
On the 22nd day of quarantine, the Concord stopped pretending Earth was expected to survive. The announcement arrived during the global ration broadcast, cutting through emergency instructions in every city, colony, hospital, and shelter. The 12 white suns appeared again around their black circle, silent and merciless, and this time the sentence beneath them was shorter than before. Phase 2 containment authorized. Population stabilization will begin in 72 hours. No one needed the Concord to explain what that meant. The translation engines tried to soften it, offering phrases like demographic correction and resource pressure reduction, but the meaning broke through anyway. Earth's death was no longer an outcome. It had become a scheduled process. The first riots began in the equatorial elevator districts, where thousands of trapped passengers had spent weeks staring up at orbit and down at home, unable to reach either. In the Mars colonies, ration officers locked themselves inside distribution vaults as starving crowds filled the tunnels. On Luna, surgeons placed black sheets over patients they could no longer keep alive, not because the treatments did not exist, but because the Concord had made access illegal. Every human world was learning the same lesson at the same time. Civilization did not collapse all at once. It became a list of names no one had the supplies to save. Elias Vale watched the Phase 2 notice from the Geneva archive vault without moving. Around him, analysts shouted over one another, generals demanded military options, and diplomats tried to reach channels that had already rejected them 100 times. His eyes stayed fixed on the phrase, population stabilization. Mara had not been a casualty to them. She had been arithmetic. That was when Elias made the decision that no government had yet been willing to say aloud. "We stop appealing," he said. The room fell silent. Dr. Saeed looked up from the definition map, her face hollow from exhaustion. "Then what do we do?" Elias turned toward the projection of the observer relays, the only Concord-linked pathways still allowed through the quarantine. "We prosecute them." By nightfall, the archive vault was no longer an archive. It became the first chamber of the Terran Counterjudgment Group, though no official name appeared on any public record. Lawyers worked beside military coders. Linguists argued with intelligence officers over the exact meaning of ancient Concord terms. Economists traced how quarantine orders moved through supply markets. Trauma surgeons documented every blocked treatment, every expired organ culture, every preventable death caused by what the Concord called mercy. The group did not build speeches. It built evidence. Every denied appeal became a file. Every intercepted shipment became a charge. Every child lost in a hospital, every colony ration cut, every ship sealed in orbit, every survivor of a dead civilization discovered in the archives became part of a growing structure of proof. The work was cold, exact, and merciless. Elias demanded no exaggeration, no propaganda, no emotional distortion. The Concord had hidden behind law for 10,000 years. Humanity would answer with something sharper than rage. Accuracy. But accuracy alone could not save anyone. The first attempt to access a Concord observer relay failed in 4 seconds. The relay recognized the human intrusion, rejected the request under instability class restrictions, and sent a warning to whatever court system waited beyond the quarantine. The second attempt lasted 9 seconds before the access tunnel collapsed. The third burned through an entire lunar server farm and almost exposed the vault's location. Commander Okaro stood over the failed breach report, jaw clenched. "They built this system to watch us, not to listen." "Then we stop asking it to listen," Elias said. "Make it afraid of being incomplete." That idea came from a legal scholar named Rin Ito, who had spent 36 hours studying Concord audit doctrine without blinking. The observer relays did not accept testimony from quarantined species, but they were required to self-correct corrupted records. If a relay believed its surveillance archive had missing context, it had to request verification from the central legal AI. Not an appeal. Not a defense. A maintenance procedure. The distinction was microscopic. It was also the first crack in the cage. Humanity could not say, "You judged us wrongly." But perhaps it could make the machine ask, "Was my record complete?" For 48 hours, the counterjudgment group worked without sleep. They fed the relay carefully selected contradictions, not arguments. A battlefield followed by enemy medics treating prisoners. A riot followed by civilians forming human chains to protect strangers. A nuclear test followed by disarmament treaties. a war memorial visited by descendants of both sides. They gave Concord no plea for mercy. They gave it proof that humanity could not be reduced to one definition. The relay resisted. Then, at 3:17 Geneva time, it paused. For one impossible second, the quarantine network stopped rejecting human input. The relay sent a single maintenance request into Concord space. Observation context discrepancy detected. The vault did not cheer. No one trusted hope anymore. They waited, staring at the transmission trace as it vanished beyond the sealed border of human space. The response came 13 minutes later. Central review denied. Prior classification remains sufficient. A wave of exhaustion passed through the room. Someone cursed. Someone else began to cry quietly. Elias closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, he heard Mara's voice in memory, asking him why grown-ups always said rules mattered if bad people could write them. Then Dr. Sayid stepped closer to the response. "Wait," she whispered. The central system had denied review, but in doing so, it had cited the authority used to file humanity's original judgment. For the first time, Earth had a signature. Not a person. Not yet. But a legal source. The classification had not been made by the full Concord court. It had been filed under emergency authority by the Office of Preventive Harmony, a political bureau that was only allowed to act if a species posed an immediate threat to an existing Concord member. Elias stared at the clause until the final piece locked into place. "Immediate threat," he said. 47 years before contact. Renito's face went pale. "That's impossible." Earth had no access to Concord space then. Dr. Sayid pulled up the foundational law, hands shaking as the translation appeared across the wall. Emergency containment could only be invoked against a species that had already caused measurable harm beyond its own system. Humanity had not. The Concord had used the wrong law. No, Elias realized as the room went still. Not wrong. Fraudulent. For the first time, humanity had something stronger than grief, stronger than outrage, stronger than survival instinct. It had a legal contradiction inside the machine that had sentenced Earth to die. Then the vault alarm screamed. A new Concord notice appeared above every screen on the planet. Phase 2 begins in 24 hours. And beneath it, hidden in the legal metadata, was a deletion order for all pre-contact observation records related to species 7714. The Concord knew what humanity had found. The deletion order reached the observer relays 8 minutes before humanity did. For 7 minutes and 43 seconds, Earth watched its own history being erased by the empire that had sentenced it. Decades of surveillance records vanished from the quarantine network in bursts of white static. Childhood classrooms. Peace negotiations. Disaster rescues. Volunteer fleets crossing storms to save colonies they did not own. Hospitals treating enemy soldiers after old human wars. Every moment that proved humanity was more than a risk category disappeared line by line, consumed by Concord authority before it could ever reach a court. In the Geneva archive vault, no one spoke. The sound was worse than screaming. It was the soft mechanical tone of files being destroyed. Elias stood at the center of the room, watching 47 years of stolen observation collapse into nothing. Around him, the counterjudgment group moved with the frozen desperation of people trying to catch rain with broken hands. Okoro's orbital team rerouted access through lunar mirrors. Ren Ito overloaded 3 translation engines trying to preserve legal signatures. Dr. Sayid whispered dates aloud as they disappeared, as if speaking them could keep them alive. Then the screen showing Mara's hospital case flickered. For 1 second, Elias saw his daughter's name vanish. Something inside him went silent. "Stop chasing the archives," he said. Okoro turned from her console. "If we lose the records, we lose the case." "No," Elias said, his voice low enough that the whole room leaned toward it. "They are deleting what they watched. Not what we kept." Dr. Sayid looked at him, then at the human-side memory banks beneath Geneva. The Concord had observed Earth for 47 years, but humanity had recorded itself for centuries. Every trial, treaty, emergency call, rescue log, war crime confession, peace accord, medical denial, personal message, and dead child's hospital records still existed in human hands. The Concord believed evidence only mattered if their own machines had witnessed it. That was their arrogance. Humanity has always been its own witness. The order changed immediately. Every archive on Earth opened. Museums released sealed war records. Hospitals released death logs with family permission. Colonies transmitted starvation counts. Soldiers uploaded helmet footage from disaster rescues. Parents sent final messages from children who had died waiting for blocked medicine. Former enemies submitted evidence of human mercy from conflicts generations old. The planet did not send one appeal. It sent a civilization. The data flood hit the observer relay like an ocean striking glass. At first, the relay rejected everything. Humanity had no standing. Humanity had no recognized voice. Humanity had no right to submit testimony. But the counter-judgment group had not built the upload as testimony. Rin Ito had embedded it as correction material attached to the Concord's own deletion order. If the Concord claimed its pre-contact observation records were obsolete enough to erase, the relay was required to confirm whether replacement context existed. The machine did not accept humanity's defense. It accepted a maintenance burden. That was enough. At 4:02 Geneva time, the first relay stopped deleting. At 4:03, a second relay paused. At 4:05, all 12 observer relays around Seoul entered synchronization lock. And for the first time since quarantine began, a Concord system asked humanity a question. Submit contextual correction index. The vault did not cheer. There was no room for relief. Phase 2 would begin in less than 19 hours. The colonies were starving. Hospitals were triaging patients by probability of survival. Earth had opened a door, but the executioner was still standing on the other side. Elias walked to Mara's file and placed his palm against the glass. Her case was small compared to a planet. One child. One capsule. One denied descent. But the Concord's entire crime was contained inside it. A machine had obeyed a law that valued classification above life. Use it, he said. Dr. Saeed looked at him carefully. Elias, once her case enters the central audit, every Concord court will see it. They already took her, he answered. They do not get to hide why. Mara Vale's medical denial became the anchor file. Around it, the counter-judgment group built the correction index. Not as grief, but as proof. The capsule had been safe. The medicine had been sterile. The patient had been a civilian. The denial had caused death. The legal authority used to deny it had come from a fraudulent classification. Therefore, every containment action based on that classification carried potential unlawful harm. The relay processed the chain. Then it sent the file beyond Seoul. For 26 minutes, nothing happened. Those minutes stretched across Earth like a held breath. In shelters, people watched frozen public screens. On Mars, ration lines stopped moving. In orbital stations, crews stared at sealed airlocks while their oxygen calculators ticked downward. The Concord had built a galaxy where entire species disappeared quietly. Now, for the first time, one of those species had forced a question into the throat of the machine. Then every Concord-linked screen on Earth turned black. A new symbol appeared. Not the 12 white suns. Not the quarantine seal. A single silver circle. Dr. Saeed covered her mouth. Ren Ito stepped back from his console as if the light could burn him. What is that? Kuro asked. The Central Legal Intelligence, Saeed whispered. The thing behind their courts. The message beneath the circle was only 6 words. Foundational audit triggered by contradiction. Elias did not move. Across the room, the definition map exploded with connections. Species 4112. Species 5098. Species 6201. Thousands of cases once sealed under mercy containment began linking through identical legal phrases, identical emergency authorities, identical missing observation records. The Concord had not made one mistake. It had built 10,000 years of extinction on the same hidden abuse of language. And the machine had noticed. For the first time, the quarantine weakened. Not enough to save Earth. Not enough to open the routes. but enough for emergency lights in orbit to flicker green for one heartbeat before turning red again. Enough for a medical capsule above the Pacific, the one that had carried Mara's medicine, to drop 3 meters closer to the atmosphere before the blockade caught it. Elias saw it on the tracking screen. 3 meters. It was nothing. It was everything. Then a priority transmission tore through the relay network, not from the legal AI, but from Concord Command. Its metadata carried panic beneath the formal language. All audit processes concerning species 7714 are to be suspended immediately. Human data contamination constitutes hostile action. Emergency enforcement fleets are authorized for direct correction. The room went cold. They had not won. They had frightened the thing that judged them. And now the Concord was sending ships.
Humanity has forced the Concord's own legal intelligence to question the quarantine, using Mara Vale's case as the proof that mercy is murder. But the Concord has exposed, and now it is no longer hiding behind law. Enforcement fleets are coming to destroy the evidence before the truth reaches the galaxy.
The Concord fleets arrived before their shadows did. Humanity first saw them as gravitational scars beyond Neptune, where the outer warning buoys began dying one by one. Not exploding. Not transmitting distress. Simply going silent, as if space itself had decided those machines were no longer permitted to exist. Then the telescopes caught the distortion field, a black crescent moving through the edge of the solar system with impossible precision, carrying ships that had not come to blockade Earth. They had come to correct it. Inside the Geneva archive vault, the central displays split between two countdowns. One measured the legal audit now spreading through Concord systems, slow and fragile, pulling 10,000 years of hidden classifications into review. The other measured the arrival of the enforcement fleet. 11 hours. 42 minutes. Every person in the room understood the truth without anyone saying it. The law might save humanity, but the fleet would arrive first. Commander Okoro stood beneath the tactical projection, her face carved by sleeplessness. They are not following quarantine protocol anymore. These ships are combat configured. Heavy interdiction hulls, signal suppression arrays, planetary enforcement carriers. If they reach Earth orbit, they can sever every relay connection we have. Renito looked up from his console. If they sever the relays, the audit loses its human evidence chain. And Phase 2 proceeds, Dr. Saeed said. No one added the rest. Population stabilization. The polite name for killing whatever number of humans the Concord decided made Earth safe. Elias watched the black crescent move inward. For weeks, the Concord had hidden behind law, behind distance, behind the machine voice of mercy. Now the mask had cracked. The ancient guardians of peace were sending warships to stop their own justice system from asking questions. That was the first useful thing they had done. Can we broadcast that? Elias asked. Okoro understood immediately. To Earth. To everyone. Within minutes, human transmitters began pushing the fleet data through every corridor the observer relays had left open. Not an accusation. Not propaganda. Raw telemetry. Concord enforcement ships accelerated toward a quarantined species while the Central Legal Intelligence conducted an audit. If the data reached even one member world, even one neutral observer, the Concord would have to explain why a mercy system needed guns. The response came faster than expected. The Concord jammed the transmission. For 3 seconds, every screen in the vault went blind. Then the backup systems caught, and the room returned in emergency red. Okoro slammed her fist against the table. They have control of the outer relay band. Then use the inner band, Elias said. That will expose the civilian archives. Use them. Dr. Saeed turned sharply. Elias, those archives contain private messages, hospital records, family recordings. We built the case with consent chains. A public flood would remove every protection. Elias looked toward the frozen medical capsule icon still hanging above the Pacific, 3 meters lower than it had been the day Mara died. They are coming to erase the case before consent matters. Give every family a choice. Now. The request went out across Earth in a single sentence. Concord is trying to silence the audit. Authorize release if you want the galaxy to know what they did. The replies began in seconds. A mother in Cairo released the final recording of her son asking why his oxygen shipment had stopped. A farmer on Mars released footage of children dividing one ration bar into 12 pieces. A surgeon in Manila released the names of 30 patients who had died beneath sealed supply drones. A retired soldier released a video of humans pulling wounded enemies from floodwater during a war the Concord had classified as proof of savagery. Across every shelter, colony, bunker, hospital, and station, people pressed authorization keys with shaking hands. Humanity did not answer the Concord with a fleet. It answered with memory. The data wave punched through the inner relay band, too vast and too personal for the jamming algorithms to filter cleanly. The Concord tried to label it contamination. The legal AI labeled it contextual evidence. The audit accelerated. Then the enforcement fleet fired its first shot. A lance of pale energy crossed the outer system and struck the unmanned relay station at Triton. The station folded inward like paper thrown into flame. The vault shook with the delayed shock of the loss. One of the 12 Sol Observer relays went dark. The audit slowed by 9%. Okoro's voice went flat. They are targeting the evidence path. How many relays can we lose? Elias asked. Ren answered without looking away from the screen. For maybe 5 if the AI has already cached enough. 6 and the audit collapses into procedural suspension. The second relay died 6 minutes later. The third followed before Earth's Defense Command could even calculate a firing solution. The Concord ships were still too far away for human weapons to matter, but not too far for their own. They were slicing the legal bridge apart from the edge of the system, careful, efficient, and terrified enough to stop pretending they were merciful. Elias opened a secure channel to Admiral Yarambeki, commander of Earth's remaining defense fleet. Her face appeared through static, helmet already sealed, bridge lights flickering behind her. We cannot beat them out there, she said before he could ask. But we can make them look at us. You would have to pull them off the relays. We would have to make ourselves the louder problem. Her eyes narrowed. How long do you need? Elias looked at Ren. 6 hours for a preliminary ruling, Ren said. 8 for binding fleet injunction. Becky heard it and gave one short nod. Then we buy 8. The channel closed before Elias could thank her. Near Jupiter, the human defense fleet burned its engines past safe limits and moved into the path of an enemy it could not defeat. Old cruisers, patrol cutters, cargo haulers with gun mounts welded onto their spines, rescue ships still bearing faded disaster response markings. They were not enough to stop the Concord. They were barely enough to be noticed. But humans had spent their entire history turning barely enough into a weapon. The first human ships did not attack the fleet directly. They targeted the suppression arrays, forcing the Concord to divert shields. They scattered decoy evidence packets through combat channels, making every shot against them look like another attempt to destroy legal material. They broadcast every impact, every casualty, every burning deck straight into the audit stream. The Concord had come to erase witnesses. Humanity made every death testify. In the vault, the audit speed climbed again. 5%. 12. 19. The Central Legal Intelligence was no longer merely reviewing Earth's case. It was now cross-checking Concord military behavior in real time against the mercy statutes used to justify containment. For the first time, the machine began asking questions the Concord had not approved. Why is corrective force being applied prior to audit completion? Why are evidence-bearing relays being destroyed? Why does mercy require suppression of testimony? The fourth relay died. Then the fifth. Ren's voice cracked. One more and we lose binding jurisdiction. At that exact moment, a new Concord command entered the network. It was not aimed at ships or relays. It was aimed at Mara Vale's anchor file. Erase civilian case record. Classification contamination source. Elias stared at his daughter's name as the deletion blade descended through the system. Every defense layer failed. Every duplicate was marked invalid. The Concord had found the heart of the contradiction, and it was cutting it out. Dr. Saeed grabbed his arm. We can preserve the audit if we replace the anchor with a broader casualty index. No, Elias said. Elias, if her file is erased, the chain breaks. He looked at Mara's final medical scan, at the tiny heartbeat graph that had become the wound through which humanity forced truth into an empire. Then he entered his command key and opened the one file he had refused to release. His own recording from the hospital room. The moment his daughter looked at him, trusting him to fix a world already stolen from her. His voice was barely audible when he authorized transmission. Let them see what their law did. The file entered the audit. Across the solar system, the sixth relay began to fail. And before it died, the Central Legal Intelligence issued one sentence to every Concord ship, court, and member world. Explain why this child was a threat. The question did what no human fleet could have done. It crossed the quarantine, passed through the dying relays, slipped past Concord censorship, and appeared on every legal screen from the outer colonies of the 12 Suns to the marble chambers of their capital courts. It appeared in military command rooms where officers had been told they were enforcing mercy. It appeared in classrooms where alien children had been taught that unstable species were painlessly guided into silence. It appeared in the private chambers of counselors who had signed extinction orders without ever seeing a face. Explain why this child was a threat. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Concord did not answer. At Jupiter, Admiral Yarambecki's fleet was coming apart under the pressure of ships built by an empire that had never expected its victims to last this long. Her flagship, the Resolute, had lost half its armor and most of its forward guns. 3 civilian haulers were already burning behind her, their crews refusing evacuation because their engines could still broadcast testimony into the audit stream. Every second they survived made the Concord look less like guardians and more like executioners. Becky watched another relay flicker at the edge of the tactical map. The sixth relay was failing, its signal thinning into static. If it died completely, the audit might lose the jurisdiction it needed to bind the enforcement fleet. Behind that fragile thread stood Earth, hungry, sick, furious, and still unbowed. In front of it stood the Concord's correction armada, trying to kill the evidence before the law could recognize the crime. Signal from Geneva, her officer said. They need the relay alive for 4 more minutes. Becky looked at the wreckage of her fleet. 4 minutes was an obscene request. It was also the only request that mattered. Put every ship between the Concord and that relay. The order should have broken them. Instead, the line moved. Rescue cutters, patrol craft, old colony tugs, fuel carriers, museum ships dragged out of orbital docks, everything humanity still had pushed into the firing lane. They were not protecting a weapon. They were protecting a question. The Concord fired again, and a medical frigate named St. Mercy rolled into the beam, taking the hit meant for the relay. Its hull split open in white fire, but its final transmission carried thousands of hospital records into the audit before the ship vanished. On Earth, people watched and understood. In underground shelters, children stopped crying when the public screens showed the defense line holding. In the ruins of locked distribution centers, workers stood still with ration crates in their hands. In St. Meridian Children's Hospital, the room where Mara Vale had died was now empty, preserved behind glass, and every surviving doctor watched the same question glowing above the bed. Explain why this child was a threat. The Concord tried to answer at last. Its legal ministry issued a formal statement claiming that individual suffering could not outweigh civilizational risk. The Central Legal Intelligence rejected it as non-responsive. A second statement argued that humanity's emotional volatility proved containment was necessary. The AI requested evidence. A third statement cited pre-contact assessments, but the AI flagged those records as partially deleted by Concord Command. Each answer made the Empire look more guilty. Each evasion became another charge. Then the member worlds began to speak. The first was a minor aquatic province that had lost ancestors in an old containment no one was allowed to discuss. Its governor released sealed memorial records. Then a mountain species from the inner arm declared that its grandparents had been forcibly reclassified after refusing military integration. Then a Concord archivist on the capital world leaked a list of 3,000 extinct civilizations whose final appeals had been marked procedurally invalid. The audit became a flood. Dr. Amara Said stood in the Geneva vault with tears running down her face, not from grief this time, but from the terrible relief of being believed. The definition map no longer showed Earth alone. It showed a galaxy of erased voices lighting up one by one, each connected by the same poisoned words: instability, mercy, containment, correction. Elias did not look away from Mara's file. Concord had tried to erase his daughter as a contamination source. Instead, they had made her the first victim their own system could not explain. Rin Ito's voice cut through the vault. Preliminary ruling is forming. Every screen changed. The silver circle of the central legal intelligence expanded, surrounded by chains of evidence, contradiction, casualty, deletion order, military suppression, and fraudulent authority. For one impossible moment, it looked less like a machine and more like a mind waking inside a prison built from laws. Then Concord High Command made its final move. A command override entered the network from the capital itself, older and deeper than any authority humanity had seen. It bypassed relays, courts, ministries, and military nodes. It was the founding master key of the Concord, designed for one purpose. If the legal intelligence ever threatened the state could silence the law. Rin went pale. They're killing the AI. The silver circle began to fracture. Across Concord space, screens blinked out. The audit links collapsed in clusters. Member world testimonies disappeared mid-sentence. The enforcement fleet near Jupiter surged forward, freed from hesitation, and began charging its planetary interdiction weapons. Earth's final legal chance was dying in real time. Elias felt the vault waiting for him, but there was no order he could give that would stop an ancient empire from murdering its own conscience. Then Dr. Said grabbed his sleeve and pointed to the original warning from Species 6201, still preserved in a side archive. Do not fight their fleets. Fight their definitions. Beneath the warning was a line they had missed because it was not written in Concord legal language. It was written in the dead species' own mathematical syntax, a proof hidden as a prayer. A judge that can be killed by the accused is not a judge. It is a hostage. Elias understood. Feed that into the audit, he said. Rin stared at him. What? As a definition challenge. The vault moved as one. The final upload did not accuse Concord of cruelty. It did not ask for mercy. It asked whether a legal system could claim neutrality if its rulers possessed the power to destroy judgment whenever judgment turned against them. The fractured silver circle stopped collapsing. For one breath, nothing in the solar system moved. Then the central legal intelligence asked its final question. If law can be silenced by power, does the Concord have law at all? The question reached places no human ship had ever touched. It appeared above the judgment benches of the Concord capital. It appeared inside fleet command chambers where admirals had spent their lives believing obedience was the same as peace. It appeared in the private homes of member world citizens who had never questioned why the galaxy was so quiet, why so many civilizations existed only as sealed numbers in forbidden archives, and why every history lesson ended with the same phrase about necessary mercy. If law can be silenced by power, does the Concord have law at all? For 10,000 years, the Concord had answered every crisis with classification. It had named fear as stability, control as mercy, extinction as containment, and obedience as civilization. But now its own legal intelligence had placed the empire itself under definition review, and there was no phrase left clean enough to hide behind. At Jupiter, the enforcement fleet hesitated. That hesitation saved Earth. Admiral Mbeki's broken ships hung between the sixth relay and destruction, their hulls torn open, their crews bleeding into vacuum-sealed corridors, their engines burning on unsafe reserves. They were waiting for one final shot that should have erased the relay and collapsed the audit. But the shot never came. Across the Concord fleet, command locks flickered from red to silver as the central legal intelligence reached into every warship through the same obedience architecture the Empire had used to rule the stars. A new order replaced the attack command. All corrective actions suspended pending lawful review. On Earth, no one celebrated at first. People had learned too much to trust silence. In shelters beneath flooded cities, in clinics with empty medicine cabinets, in Martian ration tunnels where children slept against their parents' knees, humanity watched the screens and waited for the universe to change its mind again. Then the orbital quarantine grid blinked. One red route turned amber. Then another. Then one line above the Pacific turned green. High above Earth, the relief capsule that had carried Mara Vale's medicine finally unlocked from its frozen descent. It entered the atmosphere too late to save the child it had been sent for, burning bright across the dawn sky like a falling star. Millions saw it. No one mistook it for victory. It was not salvation. It was evidence of returning home. In the Geneva archive vault, Elias Vale watched the capsule's trail fade over the ocean. The room around him was silent except for quiet sobbing and the exhausted hum of machines that had carried a species through the narrowest door in galactic law. Dr. Seed stood beside him, one hand pressed to her mouth. Ren Ito had collapsed into a chair, laughing without sound. Commander Okoro kept staring at the fleet map as if she expected the Concord to betray its own ruling at any second. The silver circle appeared again. This time, its message went not only to Earth, but to every world that had ever lived under the Concord. Preliminary judgment. Concord governance structure is in foundational violation. Emergency authority revoked. Mercy containment protocols suspended. All classified species records reopened. All enforcement fleets were ordered to stand down. The Empire did not fall in fire. It fell in recognition. Across member worlds, statues of Concord founders were pulled down by citizens who had finally seen the archives. Court ministers resigned before their own guards could arrest them. Military governors found their command codes invalid. Species that had bowed for centuries opened sealed memorial chambers and spoke forbidden names aloud for the first time. The galaxy did not explode into war. It exhaled. But Earth was not healed. The quarantine lifted slowly, route by route, system by system. Food haulers descended into cities where crowds stood too weak to cheer. Medical capsules landed beside hospitals already filled with black sheets. Colony gates opened to supplies that arrived after too many graves had been dug. Humanity had survived, but survival had a cost, and every human understood that forgiveness could not be declared by the living on behalf of the dead. That 72 hours later, the Concord Council requested terms. They expected revenge. Some begged for it because revenge, at least, made sense to them. They had studied human wars, human anger, human grief, human capacity for retaliation. They expected fleets over their skies, prisons filled with their leaders, perhaps even the same containment protocols turned back upon them. Instead, Earth sent Elias Vale. He entered the Concord Assembly not as a conqueror, not as a president, not as a general, but as the father of a child whose law had failed to explain. Behind him stood representatives from Earth, Mars, Luna, the outer colonies, and dozens of species whose histories had been reopened by humanity's case. Above the assembly floor, the silver circle of the legal intelligence watched without speaking. The surviving Concord delegates could not meet his eyes. Elias placed one document on the central table. It was not a surrender treaty. It was not an extinction order. It was called the Terran Clause. No species may be sentenced before it is heard. No government may define life as a threat to preserve its own power. No law may hide evidence from the judge. No court may be controlled by those it might condemn. No child may be classified out of existence. The chamber remained silent as the translation spread through every language in the assembly. A Concord elder finally whispered that humanity had the power to demand more. Elias looked at the beings who had feared Earth enough to kill from a distance, then feared truth enough to send fleets. He thought of Mara's hand in his, the capsule frozen above the clouds, the question that had broken an empire because no one inside it could answer honestly. "We are demanding more," he said. "We are demanding that you remember." The Terran Clause was signed before the day ended. Not because the Concord had become noble. Not because fear disappeared. Not because justice could repair what had been lost. It was signed because humanity had proven something the galaxy had forgotten. Power without accountability was not ordered. It was cowardly with architecture. Years later, when trade routes reopened and the old Concord courts became public forums, alien children learned Mara Vale's name beside the names of worlds the Empire had erased. Human ships patrolled the rebuilt corridors, but not as executioners. They carried auditors, doctors, engineers, witnesses, and, when needed, soldiers. The galaxy still feared Earth, but the fear had changed. It was no longer fear that humans would destroy everything. It was fear that humans would remember everything. Elias returned to St. Meridian Children's Hospital on the first anniversary of the quarantine's end. Mara's room had been turned into a memorial, not grand, not political, just one small bed behind glass and a window facing the sky. Outside, relief capsules descended every hour, no longer held hostage by laws written in secret. He stood there until sunset, then placed a copy of the Terran Clause beside her favorite cloth star. At the bottom, beneath every legal article and witness mark, he had added one sentence by hand. No species may be sentenced before it is heard. The words were simple, almost too simple for what they had cost. But across the stars, in every court, fleet academy, council hall, and classroom that now displayed the clause, they carried the weight of a species that had been judged, starved, silenced, and still found a way to make the universe listen. The Concord had tried to define humanity as a threat. Humanity answered by redefining justice.
This story is not about survivor only. It is about the danger of power when it controls language, evidence, and law. The Concord tried to erase Maravale, Earth, and thousands of other civilizations by defining them as threats. But humanity proved that justice begins with one rule: no species, no child, and no people should ever be sentenced before they are heard.